David Chen had always been a creature of habit. Every Tuesday and Friday at exactly 7:30 a.m., he would hear the soft jingling of keys at his front door, followed by the quiet footsteps of Sophia, his housekeeper. For 3 years, this routine had been as reliable as his morning coffee and stock market updates. He never really paid much attention to her. Sophia was just there, like the expensive furniture or the stunning view of Central Park from his penthouse windows. She moved through his apartment like a gentle breeze, cleaning and organizing while he worked from his home office, building his tech empire one deal at a time. David's world was filled with board meetings, million-dollar contracts, and conversations with people who spoke his language, the language of business, profit margins, and market disruption. His cleaning lady was simply part of the background noise of his successful life. That Tuesday morning started like any other. David was in his office by 6 a.m., preparing for what he knew would be a challenging day. His company was trying to close a deal with a French luxury brand, and the negotiations had been dragging on for months. The French executive seemed impossible to please, constantly finding fault with everything from contract terms to marketing strategies. His assistant had scheduled a conference call with the Paris office for 8 a.m. sharp. David had spent the previous evening reviewing documents, trying to understand why every conversation with these French partners felt like walking through a minefield. They seemed to take offense at the smallest things, and David couldn't figure out what his team was doing wrong. As usual, Sophia arrived precisely on time. David heard her familiar greeting of "Good morning, Mr. Chen" through his office door, followed by her quiet acknowledgement when he responded with his standard, "Morning, Sophia." Then came the sounds he had grown accustomed to. The gentle clink of cleaning supplies, the soft whir of the vacuum cleaner in distant rooms, the barely audible movement of someone who had mastered the art of being invisible. The conference call began at 8 a.m. as planned. For 45 minutes, David and his team tried to navigate another frustrating conversation with their French partners. The French executive seemed dismissive and cold, speaking in clipped tones about cultural considerations and proper business protocols that David's team apparently didn't understand. "We will need more time to consider your proposal," said Monsieur Dubois, the lead negotiator, his accent thick with what sounded like barely concealed irritation. "Perhaps your team needs to better understand how we conduct business in France." The call ended abruptly, leaving David staring at his computer screen with a mixture of anger and confusion. This deal was worth $20 million, and it was slipping through his fingers for reasons he couldn't grasp. He had built his fortune by understanding people and markets, but these French partners remained a complete mystery. He leaned back in his leather chair, rubbing his temples. The stress was getting to him. Maybe he needed coffee? Or perhaps he should call his business mentor for advice. As he sat there trying to decide his next move, David realized something unusual. He couldn't hear Sophia moving around the apartment. Normally, by this time, she would be working in the living room or kitchen, the soft sounds of her cleaning creating a familiar rhythm in the background. But now there was only silence. Had she left early? That would be completely unlike her. In 3 years, Sophia had never deviated from her routine. Curious and slightly concerned, David decided to check if everything was okay. He stepped out of his office and walked toward the kitchen, following the marble hallway that connected the main rooms of his penthouse. As he got closer, he began to hear something that made him stop in his tracks. Someone was speaking French, not just any French, but rapid, flowing, beautiful French that sounded nothing like the stilted, formal language he had been hearing in his business calls. This was the kind of French that belonged in poetry or passionate debate. The voice was animated, expressing complex ideas with the kind of fluency that comes from years of education and cultural immersion. David moved closer, staying hidden around the corner. The voice was definitely coming from his kitchen, and as he listened more carefully, he realized with growing amazement that the person speaking was Sophia. His quiet, invisible housekeeper was engaged in what sounded like a sophisticated intellectual discussion. She was talking about literature, philosophy, and art with someone on the phone, using vocabulary that David was certain he had never heard in any of his business meetings. Her accent was perfect, her grammar flawless, and her passion for the subject matter was evident in every word. "But you see," Sophia was saying in French, "Sartre's concept of bad faith is particularly relevant when we examine how people choose to limit themselves, rather than face the anxiety of total freedom. It's fascinating how he argues that we often pretend we have no choice in order to avoid the responsibility of our decisions. David stood frozen, his mouth slightly open. This woman who had been cleaning his apartment for 3 years, who he had barely noticed, was discussing existential philosophy in perfect French. She sounded like a university professor, not like someone who spent her days scrubbing bathrooms and dusting furniture. The conversation continued for several more minutes. Sophia discussed French literature with the expertise of someone who had spent years studying it. She referenced obscure poets, quoted passages from memory, and analyzed complex themes with the kind of insight that David associated with his most educated business associates. When Sophia finally noticed him standing in the doorway, the change was immediate and heartbreaking. Her face flushed with embarrassment, and she quickly switched to English, speaking in the quiet, apologetic tone he had always known. "Oh, Mr. Chen, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to disturb you. I had to take a quick call. I'll get right back to work." She hung up the phone quickly, her hands shaking slightly as she reached for her cleaning supplies. The transformation was shocking, from confident intellectual to nervous domestic worker in the span of seconds. David found himself unable to move or speak. His mind was racing with questions. Who was this woman? How had he lived in the same space as her for 3 years without knowing anything about her? And more importantly, what did this mean? For the first time in his successful career, David Chen realized that he had been completely blind to something extraordinary that had been right in front of him all along. The woman he had treated as invisible might be exactly what his company needed to solve their French business problems. But more than that, he was beginning to understand that he had made assumptions about people based on their jobs, rather than their abilities. Standing in his kitchen, watching Sophia nervously return to her cleaning, David felt something he hadn't experienced in years, genuine surprise about another human being. The routine Tuesday morning had suddenly become the most interesting day he'd had in months. David couldn't sleep that night. Every time he closed his eyes, he heard Sophia's voice speaking that beautiful, sophisticated French. He kept replaying the moment in his mind, trying to make sense of what he had witnessed. How had he been so blind for 3 years? The next morning, he found himself pacing around his apartment before Sophia arrived. He had canceled 2 important meetings, something he never did because he couldn't concentrate on anything else. When he heard her keys at the door, his heart actually started beating faster. "Good morning, Mr. Chen," Sophia said in her usual quiet voice, not making eye contact as she set down her cleaning supplies. "Good morning, Sophia," David replied, but this time he didn't retreat to his office. Instead, he lingered in the hallway, unsure how to begin the conversation that had been keeping him awake. Sophia seemed nervous. She kept glancing at him as she organized her cleaning products, clearly uncomfortable with the change in their routine. Finally, she spoke up. "Mr. Chen, I want to apologize again about yesterday. The phone call was inappropriate. It won't happen again." David felt a pang of sadness hearing her apologetic tone. "Sophia, please don't apologize. I was impressed. Your French is incredible. Where did you learn to speak like that?" Sophia's hand stilled on the cleaning supplies. For a moment, she looked like she might run away. Then something shifted in her expression, and David saw a flash of the confident woman he had heard on the phone. "I studied in France for many years," she said quietly, "but that was a long time ago." "What did you study?" David asked gently, sensing that pushing too hard might cause her to retreat again. Sophia looked at him for a long moment, as if deciding whether to trust him with the truth. Finally, she said, "Literature. French literature and philosophy." The words hung in the air between them. David felt like he was seeing Sophia clearly for the first time. Would you mind telling me more? I promise I'm not trying to pry. I'm just genuinely curious." Something in his tone must have convinced her because Sophia set down her cleaning supplies and really looked at him. When she spoke, her voice was different, stronger, more confident. "I have a PhD in French literature from the University of Lyon," she said, watching David's face for his reaction. "I specialized in 18th and 19th century poetry and philosophy. I wrote my dissertation on the influence of French Romantic poets on modern existentialist thought." David felt like he had been punched in the stomach. A PhD from one of France's most prestigious universities. He tried to keep his expression neutral, but his mind was reeling. That's incredible, Sophia. But how did you end up? He gestured around the apartment, not wanting to finish the sentence in a way that might sound insulting. Sophia's smile was sad but not bitter. How did I end up cleaning houses? It's a long story, Mr. Chen. I have time, David said, and he meant it. If you're comfortable sharing, I'd really like to hear it. Sophia walked to the large window overlooking Central Park and stood there for a moment, gathering her thoughts. When she turned back to David, her posture was different, straighter, more dignified. I was born in Colombia, she began. My parents were teachers and they sacrificed everything to send me to university in France. I was a brilliant student, or at least that's what my professors told me. I loved learning, loved books, loved the way ideas could change how you see the world. David listened intently as Sophia's story unfolded. She had completed her PhD with honors and returned to Colombia to teach at the National University in Bogotá. For 8 years, she had been a professor, publishing papers, mentoring students, building a life around the literature she loved. I was happy, Sophia said simply. I had my own apartment near the university, a good salary, respect from my colleagues. I was even working on a book about French influences on Latin American literature. Then everything changed. The change had come gradually at first. Political instability, economic problems, growing violence in the city. Sophia's university began cutting programs and laying off professors. The final blow came when her department was eliminated entirely due to budget cuts. At first, I thought I would find another position, Sophia continued. I sent applications to universities all over South America, but the economy was bad everywhere. Academic jobs were disappearing. She paused, looking out at the park again. Then my sister called from New York. She had been living here for 5 years working as a nurse. She said there were opportunities here that I could start over. I sold everything I owned to buy a plane ticket. David felt a heavy weight settling in his chest as he began to understand the magnitude of what Sophia had lost. When I arrived in New York 6 years ago, I had 2 suitcases and about $300, Sophia said. I thought with my education I would find work quickly. I spent months applying to universities, museums, cultural organizations, language schools. Everyone wanted American experience I didn't have, or certifications I couldn't afford to get. The reality of survival had hit quickly. Sophia's savings ran out within 2 months. She had to take any work she could find just to pay rent for a small room she shared with 3 other women. I started cleaning houses because it was the only job I could get immediately, Sophia said. The agency didn't require perfect English or American credentials. They just needed someone reliable who worked hard. What struck David most was how Sophia told her story without self-pity. She spoke matter-of-factly about losing her career, her status, her entire identity, as if it were simply another chapter in a book rather than a devastating personal tragedy. Don't you feel angry? David asked quietly. Don't you feel like your talents are being wasted? Sophia considered the question seriously. Sometimes, she admitted, especially when I see professors on television or read academic articles online. I think about the book I never finished writing, the students I never got to teach. But anger doesn't change anything. I needed to survive and I needed to support my daughter. You have a daughter? David asked. Isabella. She's 16 now. She was 10 when we came here. Sophia's face lit up when she talked about her daughter. She's brilliant, just like her grandmother used to say I was. Perfect grades, speaks 3 languages, wants to study medicine. Everything I do is for her. David felt a lump forming in his throat. For 3 years, this woman had been cleaning his apartment, invisible to him, while carrying the weight of her lost career and the responsibility of providing for her daughter's future. Meanwhile, he had been complaining about French business partners who wouldn't take his calls seriously. The person you were talking to yesterday, David said slowly. On the phone in French, Dr. Martineau, Sophia replied. He was my thesis advisor in Lyon. He teaches at Columbia University now. Sometimes he calls me to discuss academic papers or to get my opinion on his research. He says I still have one of the sharpest analytical minds he's ever worked with. David stared at her, his mind working furiously. Sophia, you realize you're probably more qualified to handle French cultural business matters than most of the consultants I've hired? Sophia looked confused. I don't understand. I've been struggling for months with French business partners. My team can't seem to communicate effectively with them, and I've been paying expensive consultants who don't seem to understand French business culture any better than we do. For the first time since David had known her, Sophia laughed. It was a rich, intelligent sound that transformed her entire face. Mr. Chen, most Americans approach French business relationships completely wrong. You probably try to be direct and efficient, yes? Get straight to the point. Focus on numbers and timelines. David nodded, amazed at her insight. French business culture values relationship building, intellectual conversation, and mutual respect before any serious negotiations begin. They want to know who you are as a person, not just what you can offer financially. They're probably thinking your team is rude and culturally ignorant. David's mouth fell open. In 30 seconds, Sophia had identified exactly what his expensive consultants had failed to understand in 6 months of failed negotiations. Standing in his living room, David realized he wasn't just looking at his housekeeper anymore. He was looking at exactly the person his company needed, someone who had been hiding in plain sight all along. David spent the next 3 days thinking about nothing but Sophia. He found himself unable to focus on his usual business activities, constantly distracted by the revelation that had turned his understanding of the world upside down. Every time he walked through his apartment, he saw it differently, knowing that someone with such extraordinary qualifications had been quietly moving through these rooms for years. On Thursday morning, instead of his usual early start, David found himself sitting in his kitchen at 6 a.m., drinking coffee and staring out at the city skyline. His mind kept returning to the same thought. What if Sophia could help solve his French business crisis? The more he thought about it, the more convinced he became that this wasn't just coincidence. His company had been hemorrhaging money trying to close deals with French partners. They had hired 3 different consulting firms, spent over $200,000 on cultural training seminars, and even flew executives to Paris twice for relationship-building meetings. Nothing had worked. Meanwhile, the woman cleaning his apartment had been quietly possessing exactly the expertise he needed. It was almost absurd. When Sophia arrived that morning, David was ready for her. "Sophia, I need to ask you something important," he said before she could start her usual routine. She looked at him with a mixture of curiosity and concern. Over the past few days, their interactions had become more comfortable, but David could tell she was still adjusting to being seen as more than just the cleaning lady. "Of course, Mr. Chen. What is it?" "I've been thinking about our conversation about your background and expertise. I have a business proposition that might sound crazy, but I want you to hear me out." Sophia set down her supplies and gave him her full attention. David noticed how different she looked when she was really listening. More alert, more present, more like the professor she used to be. "My company is in trouble with our French partnerships," David began. "We've been trying to close deals worth millions of dollars, but we keep hitting cultural barriers that we don't understand. We've hired expensive consultants, but nothing they've suggested has worked." He paused, watching Sophia's expression. She was nodding slightly, clearly understanding the problem. "Yesterday, when you explained French business culture to me in 30 seconds, you identified issues that our consultants missed after 6 months of research. That's when I realized something. My company needs someone with real French cultural expertise, not just business school theories about international relations." Sophia's eyes widened slightly. "Mr. Chen, what are you saying?" David took a deep breath. "I'm saying I want to offer you a job. A real job, using your actual qualifications and expertise." The silence that followed was so complete that David could hear his own heartbeat. Sophia stared at him as if he had just spoken in a foreign language. I don't understand," she finally said. "I want to create a position for you at my company, Director of International Cultural Relations or something like that. Your job would be to help us navigate cultural differences with our international partners, starting with our French deals." David had spent hours the previous evening researching what such a position might involve. "You would work directly with our executive team, review our international communications, advise on cultural sensitivity, and maybe even travel to meetings when we need someone who truly understands the cultural context." Sophia's face went through a series of expressions: confusion, disbelief, hope, and then fear. "Mr. Chen, I appreciate this offer, but I think you're overestimating my abilities. I'm a literature professor, not a business executive." "Sophia, listen to me," David said earnestly. "I've been in business for 15 years. I've worked with Harvard MBAs, expensive consultants, and international experts. None of them understood what you grasped immediately about French business culture. Your academic background gives you cultural insights that business schools can't teach." He leaned forward, trying to convey his sincerity. "Besides, intelligence and cultural understanding are the hardest things to find in business. Everything else can be learned." Sophia shook her head slowly. "But I don't know anything about corporate environments, about business strategies, about, how to research, how to analyze complex problems, how to communicate with different types of people," David interrupted. "You spent years teaching university students, which means you know how to explain complicated ideas to people who don't understand them. That's exactly what we need." David pulled out his phone and showed Sophia some emails from their French partners. "Look at these messages. Can you tell me what they're really saying?" Sophia read the emails quickly, her expression changing as she processed the formal language. "They're not just discussing business terms," she said slowly. "They're testing whether you respect French intellectual traditions. This phrase here about appropriate consideration of cultural heritage. They're asking whether you understand that French luxury brands aren't just products. They're expressions of centuries of artistic tradition." "See?" David said triumphantly. "That's exactly the kind of insight we need. Our consultants read those emails as standard business language. You read them as cultural communication." Sophia was quiet for a long moment, and David could practically see her mind working through the possibilities and obstacles. "What about salary?" she asked quietly. "I have responsibilities, a daughter to support." David named a figure that made Sophia's eyes widen in shock. It was more than 3 times what she earned from all her cleaning jobs combined. "That's impossible," she whispered. "I can't accept that much money. It's too much." "Sophia, that's actually on the lower end for executive positions at my company, and it comes with full health insurance, retirement benefits, and educational support for your daughter." The mention of her daughter seemed to hit Sophia like a physical blow. David saw tears forming in her eyes. "Isabella could go to college without worrying about money," Sophia said, almost to herself. "She could study medicine like she dreams about without me having to work 3 jobs to pay for it." "Exactly," David said softly. "This isn't charity, Sophia, this is business. I need your expertise, and I'm willing to pay market rate for it." Sophia stood up and walked to the window, the same spot where she had told David her story a few days earlier. She stood there for several minutes, and David remained silent, letting her process the offer. "I'm scared," she finally admitted without turning around. "For 6 years I've been invisible. I've learned to be quiet, to not draw attention to myself, to just do my work and go home. The idea of being in meetings, of giving advice to executives, of people depending on my opinions, it terrifies me." David felt a wave of compassion for this incredibly accomplished woman who had been forced to make herself small for so long. "I understand," he said. "But Sophia, you've been surviving in a foreign country, learning a new culture, supporting your daughter, and maintaining your intellectual curiosity despite losing everything you worked for. If that's not executive material, I don't know what is." Sophia turned back to him, and David could see the internal battle playing out on her face. "What if I fail?" she asked. "What if I'm not as good as you think I am? What if I embarrass your company? What if you succeed beyond both of our wildest dreams?" David countered. "What if you help us close deals that seemed impossible? What if you become one of our most valuable team members?" He stood up and walked over to where she was standing. "Sophia, the worst-case scenario is that you try something new and it doesn't work out. But if you don't try, you'll always wonder what might have been. And your daughter will see that her mother took a chance on herself." Sophia looked out at Central Park one more time, then turned back to David with something new in her expression: determination. "When would I start?" she asked. David smiled, feeling a rush of excitement and relief. "How about Monday?" Sophia's first day at Chen Technologies was unlike anything she had experienced in 6 years. Walking through the sleek glass doors of the Manhattan office building, wearing her first business suit in over half a decade, she felt like she was stepping into a different world entirely. David had arranged for her to have an office on the 20th floor, with windows overlooking the city. As Sophia stood in the doorway of what was now her office, she couldn't quite believe it was real. The last time she had owned a desk, she was Professor Mendoza at the National University in Bogota. Now she was Sophia Chen, Director of International Cultural Relations. The nameplate on her door still made her smile every time she saw it. Her first week was overwhelming. David had arranged meetings with various department heads so Sophia could understand how the company operated. She sat through presentations about market research, product development and financial projections, trying to absorb years of business knowledge in a matter of days. The hardest part wasn't learning the business concepts. Sophia's academic background had taught her how to quickly understand complex systems. The hardest part was believing she belonged there. In the elevator, she would catch herself straightening her jacket and checking her reflection, still surprised to see herself dressed like an executive. During meetings, she would sometimes catch colleagues looking at her with curiosity, clearly wondering who this new person was and where she had come from. The whispers started during her second week. "Did you hear about the new director?" Sophia overheard two employees talking by the coffee machine. "Apparently she was David's housekeeper last month. Now she's making 6 figures. Sophia felt her face burn with embarrassment, but she forced herself to keep walking. She had expected this. David had warned her that some people might question her rapid promotion. The truth was, she questioned it herself sometimes, but then came her first real test. 2 weeks into her new job, David invited Sophia to sit in on a video conference with their French partners. The same executives who had been frustrating David's team for months were scheduled for another negotiation attempt. "I want you to just observe," David told her before the meeting. "Take notes on the cultural dynamics you notice. Don't feel pressure to say anything." Sophia nodded, but as she sat in the conference room watching the interaction unfold, she felt her professor instincts kicking in. She could see exactly where the communication was breaking down. David's team was presenting their proposal with typical American directness, focusing on profit margins, delivery timelines, and market expansion opportunities. Meanwhile, the French executives looked increasingly distant and uninterested with each slide. 20 minutes into the presentation, Monsieur Dubois, the lead French negotiator, interrupted with obvious frustration. "Pardon me, but I think we are perhaps wasting time here. Your team continues to approach this partnership as if it were a simple transaction, like buying machinery or raw materials." David's marketing director, a Harvard MBA named Robert, looked confused. "I'm sorry, could you clarify what you mean?" "We're presenting comprehensive market data and profit projections." Monsieur Dubois sighed, and Sophia recognized the expression on his face. She had seen the same look on her university colleagues when dealing with students who completely missed the point of a literature discussion. Without thinking, Sophia leaned forward and spoke up. "Monsieur Dubois, if I may," she said in perfect French, "I believe our American colleagues would benefit from understanding your perspective on the deeper cultural significance of this partnership." The change in the room was immediate. Monsieur Dubois straightened in his chair, his entire demeanor shifting from frustrated to curious. David's team looked shocked to hear Sophia speaking fluent French. "Ah, finally," Monsieur Dubois replied in French, a slight smile appearing on his face. "You understand that we are not merely discussing business arrangements." "Precisely," Sophia continued in French. "For French luxury brands, partnerships are not just financial agreements. They are relationships that reflect shared values, respect for craftsmanship traditions, and commitment to cultural heritage. My American colleagues are focused on demonstrating the profitability of this partnership, but you need to understand their appreciation for French artisanal excellence." For the next 10 minutes, Sophia facilitated a conversation that transformed the entire dynamic of the meeting. She translated not just languages, but cultural concepts and expectations. She helped David's team understand that the French partners wanted to see evidence of cultural respect and intellectual engagement, not just profit projections. By the end of the call, Monsieur Dubois was speaking warmly about the possibility of moving forward with negotiations. "Mademoiselle," he said to Sophia before ending the call, "it is refreshing to work with someone who understands that business is ultimately about human relationships and shared values." After the video conference ended, David's team sat in stunned silence for a moment. Then Robert, the Harvard MBA who had been presenting, turned to Sophia with genuine respect. "That was incredible," he said. "I've been trying to crack that cultural barrier for 6 months. You did it in 10 minutes. Word spread quickly through the office about Sophia's success in the French meeting. Suddenly, the whispers changed tone. Instead of questioning her qualifications, people were asking for her advice on their own international projects. Within a month, Sophia had transformed not just the French partnership, but several other international relationships. She helped the German team understand why their engineering partners were frustrated with American communication styles. She advised the Japanese division on the cultural significance of certain business protocols. She even helped resolve a months-long misunderstanding with their Italian suppliers. But Sophia's impact went beyond just solving cultural communication problems. She began to see patterns in how the company approached international business that were creating unnecessary obstacles. "David," she said during one of their weekly meetings, "I think we need to completely restructure how we train employees for international work." She had been observing the company's approach to global partnerships and realized that most of the cultural training focused on surface-level differences. What gifts to give, how to shake hands, basic etiquette rules. But the real barriers were deeper, involving different ways of thinking about relationships, trust, and business priorities. "What do you have in mind?" David asked. Sophia proposed creating a comprehensive cultural intelligence program that would help employees understand not just what to do in different countries, but why certain approaches worked or failed. She wanted to bring in her academic expertise to develop training that addressed the psychological and historical roots of cultural differences. The program was a massive success. Other companies began asking Chen Technologies to consult on their own international cultural challenges. Sophia found herself speaking at business conferences, sharing her insights about bridging cultural gaps in global business. But the most rewarding moments for Sophia were the smaller, personal ones. Like when a young employee came to her office nervous about an upcoming trip to France, and Sophia spent an hour helping him understand not just business etiquette, but the cultural context that would help him build genuine relationships. Or when she received an email from Monsieur Dubois, written in French, telling her that working with her had restored his faith in American business culture. He had been so impressed with Chen Technologies' cultural sensitivity that he was recommending them to other French companies. 6 months after starting her new position, Sophia was sitting in her office late one evening, reviewing proposals for expanding the cultural intelligence program to other international markets. Her daughter Isabella called, as she did every evening after school. "Mom, my guidance counselor wants to meet with us about college applications," Isabella said excitedly. "She says with my grades I could get into some really good pre-med programs. But the good ones are expensive." Sophia smiled, looking out at the city lights through her office window. "Don't worry about the cost, sweetheart. We'll find a way to make it work." For the first time in years, that wasn't just hope talking. It was reality. The woman who had once felt invisible, who had spent years cleaning other people's homes while her PhD gathered dust, was now one of the most respected executives at a major corporation. But more than that, she was creating opportunities for other people to be seen and valued for their real contributions. As Sophia packed up her briefcase that evening, she realized that her transformation had changed more than just her own life. It had transformed how an entire company thought about the value of cultural understanding and the importance of recognizing hidden talents. The cleaning lady had become a cultural bridge builder, and in doing so, she had discovered that her greatest qualification wasn't her PhD or her language skills. It was her deep understanding of what it meant to be overlooked, undervalued, and fighting for a chance to show what she could really do. 2 years after that life-changing conversation in David's kitchen, Sophia stood on the stage at the New York Business Excellence Awards, holding a crystal trophy that recognized her as International Executive of the Year. The auditorium was filled with hundreds of business leaders, but in the front row sat the 2 people who mattered most to her, her daughter Isabella and David Chen. As Sophia looked out at the audience, she remembered the woman who used to clean David's apartment in silence, invisible and forgotten. That woman felt like a character from someone else's life now. The transformation had been remarkable, not just for Sophia but for everyone around her. Chen Technologies had become one of the most successful international companies in their sector, largely due to Sophia's cultural intelligence program. The French partnership that had once seemed impossible was now their most profitable international relationship. But the real success wasn't measured in profit margins or business awards. It was measured in the lives that had been changed along the way. After Sophia's first year at the company, David had asked her to develop a program to help other talented immigrants navigate the American job market. Sophia threw herself into the project with the same passion she had once reserved for French literature. The program, called Hidden Talents, partnered with immigrant organizations across the city to identify highly qualified people who were working in survival jobs. Sophia personally reviewed hundreds of applications from doctors working as taxi drivers, engineers cleaning offices, and teachers working in restaurants. Each story reminded Sophia of her own journey. There was Dr. Patel, a heart surgeon from India who was driving for a delivery service while trying to get his medical credentials recognized. There was Lynn, a former university professor from China who was working in a grocery store while her PhD in chemistry went unused. There was Ahmed, a civil engineer from Syria who was washing dishes at night while studying for American certification exams during the day. Sophia worked with each person individually, helping them understand not just how to navigate the American job market, but how to present their international experience as an asset rather than a liability. She taught them the same lesson David had taught her, that their diverse perspectives weren't obstacles to overcome, but valuable skills that American companies desperately needed. The program was so successful that other companies began asking Chen Technologies to help them identify and recruit international talent. Within 2 years, Hidden Talents had helped over 300 immigrants transition from survival jobs to careers that matched their qualifications. The program caught the attention of national media. Sophia found herself featured in magazine articles and invited to speak at conferences about the untapped talent in immigrant communities. The quiet woman who had once apologized for taking a phone call was now addressing audiences of thousands. But for Sophia, the most meaningful moments happened in small conference rooms, sitting across from people who reminded her of herself, like the afternoon she met with Dr. Reyes, a pediatrician from Guatemala, who had been working as a house cleaner for 4 years. "I feel like I've lost myself," Dr. Reyes told Sophia, tears in her eyes. "I spent 15 years learning to save children's lives. Now I spend my days scrubbing floors and pretending I don't understand medicine when I overhear conversations." Sophia reached across the table and took her hand. "I understand exactly how you feel. But you haven't lost yourself. You've just been waiting for the right person to see who you really are." 6 months later, Dr. Reyes was working at a community health clinic, using her medical skills to serve families who couldn't afford expensive health care. The transformation was complete, from invisible cleaning lady to vital community resource. Stories like this filled Sophia's days and gave her work deeper meaning than any business success ever could. Meanwhile, Isabella was thriving in ways Sophia had never dared to dream. With financial stability secured, Isabella was able to focus entirely on her studies. She had been accepted to Columbia University's pre-med program, with a full academic scholarship, recognizing not just her exceptional grades but also her volunteer work, helping recent immigrants navigate the healthcare system. "I want to be like you, Mom," Isabella told Sophia one evening as they walked through Central Park. "I want to help people who feel invisible become seen." Sophia's eyes filled with tears at her daughter's words. The sacrifices of the past 6 years, the exhaustion, the humiliation, the fear, had all been worth it to hear Isabella say those words. David, too, had been transformed by Sophia's presence in his life. The successful businessman who had once barely noticed his household staff now made it a point to really see and value every person who worked for his company. He implemented programs to help all employees develop their skills and advance their careers, regardless of their starting position. He also became one of the biggest supporters of immigration reform, using his business platform to advocate for policies that would help qualified immigrants get their credentials recognized more quickly. His friendship with Sophia had opened his eyes to how much talent was being wasted because of bureaucratic barriers and cultural prejudices. Sophia changed my entire understanding of what it means to be successful, David told a reporter who was writing about their business partnership. "I used to think success was about accumulating wealth and status. Now I understand that real success is about creating opportunities for other people to reach their potential." The business relationship between David and Sophia had evolved into something neither of them had expected, a genuine friendship built on mutual respect and shared values. They had co-authored a book about recognizing hidden talent in the workforce, with all proceeds going to support immigrant education programs. The book, The Invisible Workforce, became a bestseller in business circles and led to speaking engagements around the world. Sophia found herself traveling to conferences in Europe, Asia, and South America, sharing her story and helping other countries develop programs to better utilize immigrant talent. But perhaps the most meaningful recognition came from an unexpected source. The University of Lyon, where Sophia had earned her PhD 20 years earlier, invited her to receive an honorary doctorate in recognition of her work bridging cultures and creating opportunities for immigrants worldwide. Standing in the same academic halls where she had first fallen in love with French literature, Sophia reflected on the incredible journey that had brought her full circle. The scared young woman who had left Colombia with 2 suitcases and $300 could never have imagined this moment. At the ceremony, she spoke about the hidden talents that exist in every community, waiting to be discovered. She talked about the importance of looking beyond someone's current circumstances to see their true potential. Most importantly, she challenged the audience to examine their own assumptions about the people they encounter every day. The most valuable person in your organization might be someone you've never really noticed. Sophia told the graduating class. They might be cleaning your offices at night or serving your coffee in the morning, or working quietly in the background while possessing extraordinary skills that could transform your company and your community. As Sophia and Isabella flew back to New York after the ceremony, Isabella asked her mother a question that had been on her mind for months. "Mom, do you ever regret the years you spent cleaning houses? Do you feel angry about the time that was wasted?" Sophia thought carefully before answering. "I used to feel that way," she said honestly. "But now I realize those years weren't wasted. They taught me something that all my academic training couldn't. What it feels like to be invisible, to be undervalued, to have your worth determined by other people's assumptions." She looked out the airplane window at the city lights of New York growing larger below them. "Without that experience, I never would have understood how to help other people in the same situation. Sometimes what feels like your greatest setback is actually preparing you for your greatest contribution." Today, Sophia leads one of the most innovative international business consulting firms in the country. Her daughter Isabella is in her final year of medical school and plans to specialize in community health, focusing on immigrant communities. David remains one of Sophia's closest friends and biggest supporters, and together they continue to advocate for policies and programs that help talented people reach their potential regardless of their background or circumstances. The woman who was once invisible now helps others become visible. The story that began with a simple overheard phone conversation has created ripple effects that continue to change lives across the country. Sometimes, the most extraordinary transformations begin with someone simply deciding to really see another person for who they truly are.